So welcome everybody. Let's have a look into attendance today. And the shape of this session is I'm going to have a look at the legal background to attendance in schools. We're then going to have a look through the lens of Ofsted and what they're currently looking at in their new framework. And then we're going to move on to the fun and frolics of just some good ideas, good practice that I've seen, good practice that I've used in my schools as well, and some thoughts on a new system that could help you in a really practical way to power up the gaps that are formed when children miss school. Ultimately, if children aren't in with us in school, they're not learning. We learnt that in terms of our time in lockdown, because when we sent our children home, they only seemed to really learn at the points where we were connecting with them. Oh, thank goodness, we're good at our job in schools. So let's have a look at attendance. First and foremost, I'm going to just draw back on 2021's document from the Department for Education on the Assessment Research Report, and Ofsted undertook this. So what did they find? Well, there may or may not be surprises in this, but as we go through each of these points, just think, for my organisation, where are we with these points? Are we strong, green? Are we amber? Some things to tweak. Are we red? We've really got to address this. So first, what the report said, effective schools have high expectations for every pupil's attendance at school. That includes those with inclusive natures. That's disadvantaged children, children with SEND, and those with lack or plaque or previously known to social care, if they've had a social worker in the past. We need to make sure that we communicate these expectations clearly, strongly, and consistently with parents and with pupils. Therein is one of our greatest challenge. When we're doing that strongly with our parents, especially our reluctant parents who may be truanting their child, it starts to break down relationships if we don't do that really carefully and mindfully. It's about setting expectations about attendance from the very outset. If you have a nursery, getting right into your nursery and not accepting sloppy attendance at that point. And that can be a real challenge, especially because that's non-statutory education age. And we know that there are families who play around with that when children enter reception class as well. Because of that non-statutory nature, it's a tricky thing to get that habit of mind going. We need to explain to parents and pupils why good attendance is important and how it helps with achievement. And I think that achievement element is the most important dimension. I'll talk more about that later. We need to listen to parents carefully to find out what their children are not, why their children are not attending, and also how they can act. So really listening. Quite often, our conversations with parents about attendance happens at a deficit point when things have gone wrong. So I wonder, how can we do that at a point before it goes wrong or where there's a dip? Waiting to 90% or below attendance is a really, really difficult conversation. And that's not a time where we can truly and deeply listen. We need to challenge parents. We need to make sure we challenge those who don't make sure that their children attend. It's our parents in primary schools that are truanting children, and our older children, it's themselves. But we need to connect that in terms of the parental responsibility. Again, really tricky when we're looking at maintaining relationships. We need to ensure that attendance is always recorded accurately. Well, we know that process, but that's also about trends, about ideas in terms of reasons for absence. It's not just recording that in the register. We need to systematically analyse that information to give us information about how we can head this off. I read a great book last week called Upstream Thinking. And the idea is that sometimes, like attendance, we can react and respond when things go wrong really well, really effectively to effect a change on that child. But what's even better is if we swim upstream, go back, to think, where did this start to go wrong? And what can we do now for those families and children so it doesn't happen again? And I think it's a great little philosophy around attendance. We use that data to analyse and target the actions for both the individuals but also whole school as a result of that, and change our practice. And we make sure attendance is everyone's business, not just the attendance officer, not just the head teacher. You get the idea? Everyone is keen and interested about attendance. And we need to make sure that we understand that good attendance doesn't happen in isolation. It's interwoven with so many things, but especially with the quality of your curriculum, the ethos that you have, your values, the behaviour that's in your school, and the inclusivity to make sure people feel deeply welcome. And those children with SEMH needs are nurtured in a way that's included, not excluded, in their school. And there's a message also in that document, but you simply don't stop pushing for whole school improvement once attendance reaches that national average. So you keep going. No pressure, everyone. There's a final point there as well, that ultimately the process of securing good attendance is ongoing. I think that point has already been made. So that's the first document. The second document is the statutory document from the department, and that was produced in August 24. Without going into the full details of the previous statutory document, some of the changes were these. First one was about greater clarity on the link between improving attendance and that wider school culture. The culture is what you do, the systems that you have in place, leading to the climate, how it feels to be a child attending, yearning to attend our school. It talked about changes to the law on keeping school attendance and mission registers, and we know there's been a tweak in that in the last year. It talks about setting a national framework for issuing penalty notices. So, of course, all Ofsted can do is check in on your statutory responses to these. How do you approach penalty notices? Are they effective? Are they affecting a change? Are they proportionate? Are they consistent? There's a change from parenting contracts, and that's that point where you formally meet with your families to set out a contract around their attendance, and that's now called attendance contracts. There was an update in the section on pupils who are prevented from attending school due to physical or mental ill health, to be clear where school's role starts and ends. And that also opens out into those pupils and students that you may have on part-time timetables. Ofsted are really cautious about that. If a child isn't attending because their behaviour is complex, then that is deemed as a failure to educate. A really great challenge for all of us in schools, because quite often it's the behaviour that is the most complex of those needs. But the learning needs have to come first. So if there is a child who isn't learning because of their behaviour, provided there is a swift and ready plan to reintegrate that child and help them to come back to full-time education, then that's agreeable, provided that tenaciously is the route and direction of travel. Real challenges for us. It also talks about explaining the new requirements for schools on data sharing and the different organisations that we can share that data with and gain data from. It also talks about expecting schools to inform the pupil and youth offending team worker for any unexplained absences, closing some of the gaps in that communication. So there we have it. Lots of legislation that is statutory and guiding our mind in terms of attendance. So what do Ofsted say? Well, here is a statement from the brand new framework introduced just yesterday, Monday. So if any of you have got Ofsted in today, well, off you go. Go and get yourself sorted. Don't talk to me. But if you haven't, this is what they're looking at. The impact of the school's work on the attendance, behaviour and attitudes of all pupils, especially, now that's interesting, in the previous framework, it was including, Now it's especially disadvantaged pupils, those with SEND, and those who are known or previously known to children's social care. Ofsted are using that in the phrase inclusion. So inclusion isn't SEND, it's disadvantaged, SEND, and those known or previously known to children's social care. Really focus on that. And those who may face other barriers. So that's other groups that may have barriers to attendance in your school. And it's given an example there. Could be young carers. It could be Gypsy Roman travellers. You choose. So that's what they're saying. Let's have a look at how they evaluate that in their new schedule. What it says here in the expected standard is that leaders and staff have an informed and accurate understanding of matters relating to attendance, behaviour and attitudes. They establish effective strategies to tackle. Can you feel that Department of Education pulling through on that? Can you feel that research review of effective practice pulling through on this? They're being informed by those documents. The next bullet, leaders analyse attendance information closely at whole school level and for different groups. Which groups? Well, you know the ones to start with. Your disadvantage, your SEND, your looked after and previously looked after children. And it's about identification of those barriers and overcoming and intervening. The next is overall attendance is broadly in line with national averages or shows an improving trend over time. Well, you've got a get out clause. If you're below national, that there's an improving trend. And that's more challenging than the previous framework, which looked at sustaining rather than improving to a degree. Now, bear in mind, this framework is a secure fit judgment. So it means in the expected standard for attainment, you must demonstrate you have fulfilled these bullets in order to be at the expected standard. If you haven't, or you partially have, then it's likely you will need attention and the judgment will move to needs attention. So it goes on. There's more. Attendance is improving, including the attendance of pupils who are persistently or severely absent, and individuals or groups that leaders have focused on. Okay, and then this bullet. Any reasonable adjustments or adaptations to attendance and or behaviour strategies are timely and appropriate. That's about acting when you not just responding, but acting just before things get worse. So are you tracking those 96% as they start to dip into 95% before they become persistent at 90? It goes on. Here's the inclusion part again. If it's not working for those inclusive children, you can't be at the expected standard. It says this, including those for disadvantaged pupils, those with SEND, and those who are known or previously known to children's social care, and those who face barriers. So it's really pulling on that inclusive element, which is a thread through all of the judgment areas, the evaluation areas. And it says any interventions are timely, well chosen, and targeted. So this is a laugh a minute for us all, isn't it? Where are you on those judgment criterias? So if you've felt some gaps anywhere, well, that's the place to start. The document in 2024 gives us some guidance on this. And working together to improve school attendance outlines 6 steps that appear to be highly effective in tackling attendance. Expect, monitor, listen and understand, facilitate support, formalise support, and then enforce. It's a flow chart for you. Let's unpack that. Expect, well, that's about aspiration of high standards of attendance for all children, especially those who are inclusive. It's about building that culture where all can and want to be in school and ready to learn as well. This is intertwined with attitude and behaviour. You can see those Venn diagrams pulling together. Monitor, well, that's about the rigour of use of your attendance data to help identify patterns of poor attendance, maybe in certain year groups, maybe within certain subjects and disciplines, maybe in certain phases. to really address that before it becomes an issue. Listen and understand. Well, when a pattern's spotted, that needs to be discussed with pupils and parents. Now, that's an interesting one, and I'm going to pick up on this. The advice is discussion with pupils. How often do we really, truly, deeply do that? I've got a solution for you on that today. Facilitate support, and that's about removing barriers in schools and helping pupils and parents to access that support. And that might include early help or whole family plans to be put in place to support that more formally. And that moves into the formalisation of that support. And where that persistent absence happens, you've got your contract with your parents. You're working with your EWO or equivalent, and you're engaging and involving governance to just do a sense check that what you're doing is effective. Don't forget that leadership tier. And then we've had the enforcement. That might be very formal around penalty fines. And it's just making sure that your parents recognise that they have a duty to get their child into school. So, with that in mind, let's flip this now. Let's start to talk. If all that's the case, it's quite a weight on all of our shoulders, but a worthy weight because children need an education. We know that. If they're with us, we can do the best we can for them. So let's just have a look at what some schools do in order to enact this. I'm going to start with the lens on pupils. Again, some of these won't be a revelation for you. Some of these you'll be doing. Some of these you'll have tried and dismissed because they're not right for your context. So with all those caveats, we've got things like, well, gimmicks like punctuality pup really works well for younger children in primary schools, where you have an award and that little toy, that little puppy, or even in some schools, it's a real dog, goes to visit that class that week who've had the best attendance. Awards and class awards and school awards for that can sometimes be an incentive or raise the profile of the importance of attendance. It can be tricky when you're looking at class and whole school attendance or 100% attendance because there are unintended consequences. You know, a child who is being truanted that isn't really their fault can bring a class's award down. And so that child can then be the focus of vigilante action by other children because they're being let down. So we've got to be really cautious and careful and sensitive about how we use and apply these. And pupil voice, there it is. So very important. Talking to the children about why their attendance isn't so strong. Building that ownership so that they too are responsible. Remember that phrase? All are responsible for attendance. Here's another smattering of ideas. In terms of the system itself, we might introduce attendance RAG reports on all reports so that we just emphasize that importance, ensuring that teachers are talking to their parents at parents' evening about where their attendance is. Maybe late gates, and that's a little bit of shaming, but also helping you to understand why some parents are arriving late and why some students are arriving late at that point. What was it that caused that? And can we help and support? It's about a rolling registration. So we don't arrive and register the children at one single point, but we roll it over 15 minutes. That allows those children who just find it a little bit more challenging to get in to come in slowly and settle, but also those children who don't maybe like that standing around and waiting for the gate to open. For all sorts of reasons, it might be helpful and useful. Listening to parent voice, getting out there at the front gate and talking to them. Oh, instead of going to do that, why don't we? Themed days, just elements that you can add some enthusiasm and interest and excitement to the curriculum. Sponsored spaces, maybe spaces at early morning clubs, breakfast clubs, or specific activity clubs. If children love a little bit of dance and drama, well, could we try and shift that club to the start of day to get them in? Regular leadership discussions, keeping attendance on the agenda. Case sampling, choosing specific children and tracking their attendance over 2 or 3 weeks and speaking to them, their parents, to really understand what's going on and looking at them through the school. Have a look at their day. see what is happening and why they're not as enthusiastic to attend as other children. Maybe focus parent sessions, linking governors to attendance to give that real tight profile, and professional learning communities, gathering like-minded people who are dealing with attendance issues or children who are struggling to attend and linking them across schools to share discussions, share ideas, and coach one another. And finally, what about learning itself? Catch-up sessions using working walls and other pupils to help children to catch up with what they've missed. Really focusing on missed vocabulary, helping the gaps that have formed through attendance to be filled of the essential vocabulary that your other children will have learned, and maybe recording a synopsis of learning on a working wall or other means that children can go through. Which then leads me to the final point today, the return from absence interview. This came to me when I was working with a school in Kent, and I undertook an attendance review at the school, and we worked together, and we thought, what happens when a member of staff is absent? Well, if they're absent for some time, we'll have them back in. We'll have a return to work interview to make sure everything's in place, any reasonable adjustments that need to be made are made, and we'll talk to them about what they've missed, the anecdotes, the training. Why don't we do that with children? So from that came the return from absence interview. I still think the title's a bit formal, but stay with me. What we do is when the child has been absent, we have an opportunity to sit down with that child and have a pupil conference. It's a conference just about their attendance. That might be the TA, it might be the teacher, it might be the attendance officer, it might be the flow, someone who will get the most out of that conversation with the child. They start and they say, well, tell me why you've been away. They're checking for the reasons for absence. They're checking for any factors that might have caused that absence. They're checking to see whether actually, hand on heart, could you really have been in school? Number two, we then move to, well, come on, tell me how you are today. We're getting under the skin of this then. We're really checking to see if there's any continuing factors that might impact. Well, the child might say, I'm a bit worried because, I don't get on too well with James, and I'm a bit scared of playtime today. Number three, we then talk about, okay, since you've been away, this is what you've missed. This is what we've been learning in art and design, in maths. This is what we've been learning in our phonics session. And we start to think, okay, which of those lessons, which of those bits of information do you need a bit of time to understand? So we move to point four then. Well, what lessons would you like me or a friend to review with you? And then you list those out. And then you plot the action. You assign a mentor to help them. Maybe it's another student to go through that part of learning, the essential outcome of that learning and that lesson. Talk them through in their workbooks what they learned about, the important words. It might be an adult who does that with them. You think about any opportunities for a bit of pre-teaching that might be needed in future lessons because of those gaps that have formed. And you might assign either a student or an adult mentor to support them through that lost learning. So with that in mind, the return from absence interview unpacks not just the reasons for absence, but helps with the gaps that have been formed in learning. If it's all about getting that child back to where they could be and should be, this really, really can help. And I've also devised on this next slide a blank version of that document, so you can just fill it in a very child-friendly way with that child. So I hope that's of interest to you.